Benjamin Franklin, born a long, long time ago. He was a deist in a dogmatic world. He was a rational in a revolution. He was a simple man defined by his greatness, his experiments, and his experimental attitude towards life in general. An inventor would be a good way to describe him, but that's not all he was. Benjamin Franklin was odd for his time, for any time. He was odd for humankind. He's someone that I can really find a lot to talk about. And that's what we're going to do today. This is my perspective. A man named Josiah Franklin decided to leave England and have 17 children in an underdeveloped nation. His 15th child and last son was Benjamin Franklin. He was seen as a natural-born leader from Earth and someone who was certainly on the path to academia. However, he could not graduate school due to poverty. At age 10, he just started reading and became a working man. He wanted to be a sailor at first, but his father was not keen on that idea, so he ended up getting in a candle shop because, as a 10-year-old, I guess candles are up your alley more than the open ocean. He did that until he was 13, at which point he switched over to the printing press career with his brother. This was not to the enjoyment to his father because his father always saw his 10th son as being his tithe to the church, and he hoped that his child would one day become a man of God. With what little money Franklin had, he dedicated to buying books. This was an extremely rare commodity as libraries and books in general were expensive to ship across the ocean, and there really wasn't that many printing presses in early colonial America. Most libraries over here would have been private collections, and people would borrow from each other rather than purchase. B. Franks, calling him B. Franks now, actually became a poet enthusiast in his teen years. He once even held a performance and made some money from it, but his dad humiliated him, and he gave it up forever. He writes in his biography, "So I escaped being a poet, most probably a very bad one, but as prose writing has been of great use to me in the course of my life, and was a principal means of my advancement, I shall tell you how, in such a situation, I acquired what little ability I have in that way." Very cool. B. Franks also became a lifelong vegetarian by the age of 16. He also viewed alcohol as a hindrance, and remarks that he often annoyed his contemporaries with his more hippie habits. At this point, I should share with you where exactly I'm getting this information from. It's actually B. Franks himself. He wrote an autobiography. And it's free, so Project Gutenberg. Remember, most old books are completely free, and books for sure stand the test of time. Shout out to old books, now part 2. B. Franks was just being a career man and arguing with his buddies for fun until he met Miss Reed. B. Franks loved her, but they were only 18 years old, and he was about to go to London because some drunk governor said he would mail him money once B. Franks got there. Yeah, that didn't work out. So, he arrived in London, didn't have much money, and he went to find a job in a print shop. When he worked in a London shop, there were about 50 other dudes there who drank a lot. They insisted the stronger the beer you drank, the stronger the labor you produced. Documentation states that the custom for the print house was 1 pint before breakfast, 1 pint at breakfast, the lunch replacement pint, 1 pint at dinner, a pint at 6 p.m., and 1 more for the bed. The workers developed a disdain of B. Frank's water-drinking ass and called him Water American. As you can tell, the 6-pint diet really helps with the creativity. Printing was a huge business. It was like the social media of now. B. Franks had influence, even in London, as an American. So, once he got what he considered a good enough talent, he went back home. When he arrived, he saw the governor that made the promise of sending him funds. Keith, that was his name, was now an ordinary citizen, and B. Franks just passed him without saying anything. It took an undisclosed amount of time, but B. Franks became a manager of a printing press that was owned by a man named Keimer, who didn't know anything about print. After B. Franks raised such a good team, Keimer was angry that he still had to pay B. Franks' salary because he didn't need to do anything anymore. Keimer started a screaming match, and B. Franks said, "Peace." A few months later, a creepy old man named Isaac DeCow told him, "I foresee a future. You will soon work this man out of his business and make a fortune in Philadelphia." Kinda creepy, but ended up being true. People of Philly started seeing B. Franks work well into the night, printing up all sorts of cool stuff. Quaker stuff, recipe stuff, weather stuff, just cool stuff. B. Franks shortly became the second most prominent pressman in all of Philadelphia. Keimer got into debt and went to die in Barbados. So what now? Gotta get a wife, bro. He wanted to date a lot of gals around town, but he actually ended up going back to his first love, Miss Reed. The dating union was seen as scandalous, as not too long ago, Miss Reed was married, but her husband ran away and died. Rumors started spreading that Franklin had a wife in England, thus making it double scandalous. Not cool. B. Franks handled it like a champ and put his love story to rest with words better than I could ever write. We ventured, however, over all these difficulties, and I took her to wife, September 1st, 1730. We throve together and have ever mutually endeavored to make each other happy. Thus I corrected that great erratum as well as I could. Very cute. Part 3. Now a full adult, Franklin wanted to be a service to the public. He thought fires are a good problem to solve. So he asked the local government, then a bunch of random clubs around town of other wealthy men, if we could raise an annual fund for fire watchers at night. And they said no. That is a terrible, awful, dumb idea. Then he waited a couple years and asked again if they would do the same thing, but also get taxed and have a mandatory leather bucket minimum at every house. They said yes, that is a revolutionary idea. It was shit, but the leather buckets now, wow. B. Franks then moved on to establish an early militia in Philly during the 1740s. They wanted him to be a colonel, but he declined and just convinced the Governor Clinton of New York to provide 18 cannons. His trust grew so strong in Philly that when the Assembly of the province conspired to rid Franks out of his office, he was still elected unanimously the next year. He used this next term to establish a college by getting a bunch of signatures and money from people. Fun fact before moving on, B. Franks was seen as super cool to most younger Quakers, so he would convince the majority that defensive warfare was necessary. Franks constantly butted heads with the Quakers, who held many offices in Philly, over defensive measures. The Quaker Governor Thomas of Pennsylvania prohibited the buying of gunpowder, as they were pacifists and gunpowder was an ingredient of warfare. The government aid that was sent stated it was for bread, flour, and other grain. The old Quakers knew the other grain was gunpowder, but politics. B. Franks' hard work finally paid off in a much grander scale as he became a postmaster general of America. He invented improvements to streetlights, civil services, and reformed Philadelphia into a college town with clean streets and less fires. Cambridge and Yale presented him with college degrees in the fields of arts. Remember, he dropped out of school at age 10 due to poverty. Now look where he at. Very cool. At this point, B. Franks was starting to think, this America thing is going pretty well. Dude, maybe we need to even, become our own country. Hell, England is getting their butts crushed by France right now, and we might have enough troops to tell England to fuck off. However, this was 1754, and a bit too early. Frustrated, B. Franks writes, "Those who govern, having much business on their hands, do not generally like to take the trouble of considering and carrying into execution new projects. The best public measures are therefore seldom adopted from previous wisdom, but forced by the occasion." Another really cool quote that he wrote on the subject of politics. Soon after, a new governor of New York, Mr. Morris, asked Franks how to be a good governor. Franks told him to avoid dispute when necessary. Being a skilled debater, Mr. Morris scoffed and said, he simply loved dispute so much, how would he not use it? Franklin wrote, "I think the practice was not wise, for, in the course of my observation, these disputing, contradicting, and confuting people are generally unfortunate in their affairs. They get victory sometimes, but they never get goodwill, which would be of more use to them." Time moved on, and Franks noticed an inconsistency with British rule. After all, he was still kind of being bossed around by the people over the ocean. And especially all the military people that were still here, they were all British, wig-wearing, just bossy people. And after working day and night for them to get 150 wagons for a hot-headed general, Franklin warned him not to go north because even the French were getting whacked by the Iroquois. The general told him he was a dumb American and moved on and was murdered with 60 other officers. Franklin was forced to take a position as a colonel and had to lead a regiment of troops up north to build a fort, which, thanks to his practice of firing big guns, scared off the natives. Everything went swimmingly, without any Englishmen needed. He even got men to attend church by telling the pastor to serve rum. His military career was quickly shadowed, though, as he was escorted by 40 soldiers who were reported to be riding with their sword out of their sheaths. This was a big insult to English royalty, I guess, or something. But whatever, because B. Franks was over with the whole English good, other people bad narrative. Plus, he had paid for all those wagons that were lost to that dumb general that died earlier. And when he asked England to pay him back for the debt the general owed, they responded that they would prefer not to associate with old colleagues. B. Franks was never paid and pointed out a flaw in the whole system, as in England, our laws were meant to be made by our assemblies, to be presented indeed to the king for his royal assent, but that being once given to the king could not repeal or alter them. And as the assemblies of America could not make permanent laws without his assent, so neither could he make a law for them without theirs. Now, the story ends 1757. The biography that I'm getting all this information from ends around here, and B. Franks was writing it in the last years of his life. We know what happened after this point, exactly what Franklin predicted. And he wanted to avoid that 20 years beforehand. The complexity of this autobiography shocked me, not only on a historical insight, but also a glimpse into the future. People ought to decide their own fates. And once England neglected the ability of people to change their laws, the people seized the law. Well, that's about all I got on the subject. I really just wanted to talk about what I learned from the autobiography, because we get the Revolutionary War, we kind of understand what happened, but the lead up to it was different, and this guy went on to be an inventor. I mean, he conducted experiments with electricity and is considered one of the founding fathers of electricity, not only the founding fathers of America. It's wild to think that a boy who was too poor to even attend grade school managed to carve his own path like this. In my perspective, we got a lot to talk about. In my perspective, we got a lot to talk about.